April 1945. The war in Europe is ending, but hatred runs deeper than trenches. When Sergeant James Carter's unit liberated a German field hospital, they found something unexpected. Dozens of Wehrmacht nurses, now prisoners themselves, trembling with fear. For months, Nazi propaganda told them black American soldiers were savages. But what happened next in that bombed-out hospital would shatter everything they believed and prove that humanity could survive even in war's darkest hour. April 12, 1945, 14:37 hours. The remains of St. Hedwig's Hospital in Bavaria smelled of sulfur, antiseptic, and smoke. Artillery fire had ceased 3 hours ago, leaving behind shattered windows and walls pockmarked with shrapnel. Spring rain drummed against broken tiles, while medics from the U.S. Army's 761st Tank Battalion, the Black Panthers, moved through corridors strewn with rubble and abandoned medical equipment. Sergeant James Carter, 26 years old, from Birmingham, Alabama, led his squad through the hospital's East Wing. They'd been fighting since Normandy, through France and into Germany itself, always proving themselves against two enemies, the Wehrmacht ahead and the prejudice behind. Carter carried his M1 Garand with practiced ease, boots crunching over broken glass, eyes scanning for threats. The discovery came in the basement ward. Behind a barricaded door, 32 German nurses huddled together, still wearing their grey Wehrmacht auxiliary uniforms marked with red crosses. When Carter's men forced the door open, the women recoiled as if confronting demons. Several screamed, others covered their faces. One elderly matron pulled younger nurses behind her, trembling violently, whispering prayers in rapid German. Private Lewis Washington, 19, from Detroit, lowered his rifle immediately. "Sergeant, they're terrified." Carter saw it too. This wasn't defiance or military resistance. This was primal fear, the kind propaganda manufactures in minds until it becomes indistinguishable from truth. For months, Goebbels' machine had told German civilians that black American soldiers were Untermenschen, subhuman monsters who would commit unspeakable atrocities. The nurses believed every word. Medical supplies lay scattered around the basement, mostly depleted morphine ampules, bloodied bandages, a few surgical instruments. These women had been tending wounded Wehrmacht soldiers until hours ago, when their own army retreated, abandoning them without transport or protection. Now they were enemy prisoners, trapped with the very soldiers their propaganda had taught them to fear more than death itself. Carter spoke slowly in the basic German he'd learned from a phrasebook. "Wir tun ihnen nichts. You are safe. Medical personnel, Geneva Convention." The matron, Oberschwester Margarete Klein, 53 years old, from München, stared at him with eyes wide with incomprehension. How could the monsters speak of conventions and safety? Everything she'd been told screamed this was a trick, a prelude to violence. Her hands shook as she clutched her nurse's cape. The youngest nurse, barely 18, began sobbing uncontrollably. Schwester Anna Bergmann from a farm near Stuttgart had volunteered for medical service 8 months ago, driven by patriotic duty and the promise she'd help wounded German boys. Now the war was ending in a way no one had prepared her for. The Americans were here, the black Americans. Everything she'd been taught said this moment meant horror was imminent. Carter made a decision. Lower all weapons, step back, give them space. Corporal Thomas Hayes, 22, from Chicago, hesitated. "Sergeant, regulations." "I said lower your weapons." The squad obeyed. Carter slung his rifle across his back, raised both hands palms forward in the universal gesture of peace, and slowly backed toward the doorway. His men followed his lead, creating distance between themselves and the terrified women. "You're prisoners of war," Carter said in English, speaking slowly and clearly. "You'll be processed according to military protocol. Medical personnel are protected under Geneva Convention. You will not be harmed. You'll be given food, water, medical attention. You'll be treated with the same dignity your wounded received from you." Oberschwester Klein understood perhaps one word in 5, but she understood tone. She understood the fact that these soldiers, these black soldiers, were backing away, not advancing. She understood they'd lowered their weapons when regulations said they shouldn't. The cognitive dissonance was overwhelming. Everything propaganda had taught her clashed violently with the reality unfolding before her eyes. Carter assigned Private Washington to stand guard at the door, far enough to give the nurses space, close enough to maintain security. "No one enters without my authorization. Get these women water and whatever rations we can spare. Send for a translator immediately." Within 30 minutes, a German-American interpreter from regimental headquarters arrived. Corporal Friedrich Schwarz, 41 years old, had emigrated from Hamburg to Pennsylvania in 1931, joining the U.S. Army after Pearl Harbor. He translated Carter's assurances, and slowly, incrementally, the nurses' panic began to subside, not into trust, but into confused uncertainty. That night, Carter's unit established a perimeter around the hospital. The nurses remained in the basement ward under guard, but with their door unlocked and access to facilities. They received sea rations, water, blankets. Some ate cautiously, most couldn't, fear still paralyzing their appetite. Anna Bergman lay awake on a cot, staring at the ceiling, her mind fractured by contradiction. The black soldiers had not harmed them. They'd given them food, they'd spoken of conventions and dignity, but her brother Klaus, killed at Normandy, had written letters home describing the enemy as savage. Her training films had shown imagery designed to provoke visceral disgust and terror. How could both things be true? How could the monsters be men? Carter sat in the hospital's administrative office, writing his report by candlelight. Rain continued outside. Tomorrow they'd move forward, pursuing the retreating Wehrmacht toward Munich. These nurses would be transported to a POW processing center where they'd join thousands of other German auxiliaries awaiting repatriation. He thought about Birmingham, about segregation, about the contradictions he'd lived his entire life, fighting for a country that didn't fully see him as equal, wearing a uniform that somehow made him both a hero abroad and a second-class citizen at home. He thought about how propaganda worked, how it taught people to fear what they didn't understand, how it built walls inside minds that no artillery could breach. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. But tonight, in this bombed-out hospital in Bavaria, a small victory had been won. Not through force, but through restraint. Not through conquest, but through simple human decency that refused to confirm the lies these women had been taught. The war was ending. The hard work of peace was just beginning. April 13th, 1945, 06:15 hours. Cold dawn light filtered through the hospital's broken windows, casting long shadows across the basement ward. The nurses stirred awake on their cots, disoriented by the surreal reality of their situation. They were prisoners now, dependent entirely on the men they'd been conditioned to fear. Oberschwester Klein rose first, her body aching from the thin cot and the accumulated exhaustion of months tending the wounded. She'd barely slept, her mind replaying every interaction from yesterday, analyzing every gesture from the black soldiers for signs of the violence propaganda had promised. None had come. The cognitive dissonance was maddening. Outside, Carter's squad prepared for another day of operations. Supply lines were stretched thin this deep into Germany. The 761st had been pushing hard since crossing the Rhine, and logistics struggled to keep pace with their advance. Rations were carefully managed, with each soldier receiving precisely allocated portions calculated to sustain combat effectiveness without waste. At 30, Private Washington brought breakfast to the basement ward. Sea ration tins, crackers, coffee substitute made from burnt barley. The portions were identical to what the American soldiers received. Standard issue, nothing more, nothing less. He set the crates inside the doorway, nodded respectfully to Oberschwester Klein, and withdrew without entering further. The nurses ate slowly, the unfamiliar American rations strange on their tongues. Some whispered among themselves in German, trying to make sense of their treatment. Where was the brutality they'd been warned about? Where were the atrocities? Everything was procedural, regulated, almost bureaucratic. Anna Bergman picked at her crackers, appetite suppressed by confusion and lingering fear. She watched through the open doorway as the black soldiers went about their duties, cleaning weapons, checking equipment, writing letters home. They laughed occasionally, the sound carrying down the corridor, normal human laughter, not the savage sounds propaganda had described. The dissonance was unbearable. By midday, the tactical situation shifted. German forces launched a desperate counterattack 3 kilometers east, attempting to break through American lines and establish an escape corridor toward Munich. Artillery fire intensified. The hospital, previously thought secure, suddenly found itself within range of Wehrmacht guns. Shells began falling on the surrounding blocks. Carter's orders came rapid fire over the field radio. Hold position, secure the hospital, protect the prisoners, wait for reinforcements. His squad of 9 men spread throughout the building, establishing defensive positions at windows and doorways. The nurses, hearing the artillery, panicked again, certain this bombardment signaled their execution, that the Americans would eliminate them rather than risk their liberation by German forces. "Corporal Schwartz, get down to that basement," Carter ordered. "Tell them to stay put, stay quiet. We're defending this position, not abandoning them." Schwartz translated rapidly, his words barely audible over the thunder of nearby explosions. The nurses huddled together in the center of the ward, some praying, others simply frozen in terror. Through the high basement windows, they could see smoke rising from nearby buildings hit by shells. The counterattack intensified through the afternoon. Wehrmacht forces pushed closer, attempting to retake the hospital. Carter's squad returned fire from upper windows, their M1s cracking sharp reports against the deeper boom of German artillery. Spent brass cascaded across tile floors. Smoke filled corridors. The hospital became a fortress, defended by 9 black soldiers who refused to yield. By 16 hours, supplies were critically low. Ammunition was rationed, water was nearly exhausted. Most critically, food was gone. Distributed during morning rations, nothing remained except what each soldier had saved from their personal allotment. In the basement, the nurses heard the firefight raging above them. Bullets ricocheted off stone walls, footsteps thundered across ceilings, shouted orders in English echoed through corridors, and slowly, terrifyingly, the reality settled. These black soldiers were protecting them. They were fighting German forces to prevent the nurses' recapture. Everything propaganda had said was inverted, truth running backward from expectation. At 18:30, the counterattack finally broke. Wehrmacht forces withdrew, leaving behind casualties and burned equipment. Reinforcements from the main American column arrived, securing the perimeter properly. The immediate danger had passed. Carter descended to the basement ward, his uniform soaked with sweat, face streaked with powder residue, hands trembling slightly from adrenaline crash. He'd been awake for 37 hours straight. He found the nurses exactly where Schwartz had left them, huddled together, silent, staring at him with expressions that had evolved from terror to confusion to something approaching recognition. "Through Schwartz," he explained, "the danger is past. You're safe. We held the position. No one was harmed." Oberschwester Klein stepped forward slowly, her nursing training overriding her fear. She'd seen that look on soldiers before, the exhaustion of combat, the physical toll of sustained adrenaline. "Sie sind verwundet?" she asked. "Are you wounded?" Carter shook his head. "No, ma'am. Just tired." But Klein saw what he didn't say. She saw the torn uniform where shrapnel had passed close. She saw the bandage on Private Washington's hand where he'd cut himself on broken glass during the firefight. She saw young men who'd fought not for conquest, but for duty, protecting prisoners who'd been taught to hate them. That night, the hospital was quiet again. Supply trucks arrived with proper rations, medical supplies, clean water. The crisis had passed, but something fundamental had shifted in that basement ward. The nurses had witnessed protection instead of violence, sacrifice instead of savagery. The propaganda's grip loosened, not breaking entirely, but cracking under the weight of lived experience. Anna lay on her cot again, but this time she wasn't staring at the ceiling in terror. She was remembering the sound of American rifles defending their position, defending her. She was remembering Sergeant Carter's face, exhausted, human, not monstrous. She was remembering that propaganda had lied, and the truth was far more complicated than hatred allowed. Tomorrow would bring new developments. But tonight, in this basement in Bavaria, 32 nurses began the painful process of unlearning the lies they'd been taught, one contradictory moment at a time. April 14th, 1945. 11:20 hours. The hospital had returned to an uneasy normalcy. Reinforcements secured the perimeter properly, and the counterattack of yesterday seemed almost dreamlike in morning light. Corporal Schwartz continued translating between Carter's squad and the nurses, establishing basic communication protocols. Medical supplies were inventoried, damage assessed, preparations made for the nurses' eventual transfer to a processing center. But supplies remained problematic. The 771st's logistics train struggled with the rapid advance deep into Germany. Roads were destroyed by retreating Wehrmacht engineers, bridges blown, supply depots captured but often found burned or sabotaged. The American army was advancing faster than its supply lines could sustain, running on momentum and determination rather than proper provisioning. That morning's ration delivery was short, severely short. Someone upstream had miscalculated, or a truck had broken down, or supplies had been diverted to units engaged in heavier combat. Whatever the reason, Carter's squad received approximately 60% of their expected provisions. They'd need to stretch what they had until the next delivery tomorrow. Carter gathered his men in the hospital's administrative office. "We're short on rations. Cut personal allocations by 40%. Redistribute to extend through tomorrow evening. The nurses get their full allotment as per regulations for POWs. We tighten our belts, they maintain strength. Understood?" No one objected. They'd gone hungry before. During the Bulge, during the Rhine crossing, during a dozen desperate situations where logistics failed and willpower substituted for calories. They were soldiers. Hunger was part of the equation. Private Washington distributed the reduced rations to the squad, then took the full POW allocations down to the basement ward. The nurses received their standard portions: C-ration tins, crackers, coffee substitute, even a few captured German rations that had been found in the hospital's storage. They ate quietly, no longer terrified, but still wary, still processing the contradiction between expectation and experience. By mid-afternoon, Oberschwester Klein noticed something odd. She'd been observing the American soldiers carefully, her nursing instincts analyzing their physical condition. They looked more fatigued today, movements slower, faces drawn. When Private Washington delivered the evening meal to the basement, she saw his hands trembling slightly, not from fear or cold, but from low blood sugar. She spoke to Anna in rapid German. "They're not eating properly. Look at them. They're rationing themselves short." Anna watched through the doorway as Washington climbed the stairs slowly, one hand on the wall for support. She remembered her training: recognize malnutrition, identify caloric deficit, understand the body's limits. These soldiers were operating below sustainable intake. "Why would they do that?" Anna whispered. "We're their prisoners." Klein's face hardened with realization. "They're following their rules, their Geneva Convention. Prisoners receive full rations even when captors go without. They're starving themselves to feed us properly." The revelation rippled through the basement ward as Klein shared her observation with the other nurses. The cognitive dissonance intensified to an almost unbearable degree. These men, these black soldiers they'd been taught were monsters, were literally sacrificing their own nourishment to ensure their prisoners were fed according to law. It defied everything propaganda had constructed. At 19:45, as dusk settled over Bavaria, Anna made a decision. She'd saved half her evening ration, unable to eat knowing the soldiers were hungry. She wrapped the crackers and tinned meat carefully and approached the stairs where Private Washington stood guard. Bitter, he said softly, extending the food toward him. Please, for you. Washington stared at her, incomprehension crossing his face. A German nurse, a prisoner, was offering him food. The irony was staggering. The impossibility of the moment stretched between them like a chasm years of hatred had carved. I can't accept that, miss, he said in English, knowing she wouldn't understand the words, but hoping tone would convey meaning. You need to eat. You're a prisoner. We're responsible for your welfare. But Anna insisted, pressing the rations into his hands, her eyes brimming with tears. She'd spent months hating an enemy she'd never met, believing lies about men she'd never spoken to, and now the architecture of that hatred was collapsing under the weight of their simple decency. Washington hesitated, then took the food, not for himself, but to spare her the humiliation of rejection. He nodded respectfully, a small gesture of acknowledgement that transcended language barriers. Upstairs, Carter was conducting perimeter checks when Washington approached with Anna's ration. Sergeant, one of the nurses gave me this, said it was for us. Carter examined the wrapped food, understanding immediately the profound significance of the gesture. This wasn't just charity. This was a bridge being built across an abyss of manufactured hatred. This was a young German woman choosing humanity over propaganda, choosing empathy over indoctrination. Distribute it among the men, Carter ordered quietly. Share it equally, and tell Corporal Schwartz to thank her properly. Make sure she understands we recognize what this means. Through the evening, other nurses made similar gestures. Klein offered her coffee substitute to Corporal Hayes. 2 younger nurses pooled their crackers for the squad. It wasn't much, perhaps extending the soldiers' rations by 15%, but the symbolic weight was immeasurable. Prisoners were feeding their captors, inverting the very structure of war itself. That night, Schwartz translated Carter's gratitude to the assembled nurses. Carter spoke slowly, carefully, wanting every word understood. What you've done today shows more courage than any battle. You've chosen kindness when hatred was easier. You've chosen humanity when propaganda told you we weren't human. This war has stolen much from all of us, but it hasn't stolen the thing that matters most, our ability to recognize each other's worth. Anna Bergman understood perhaps half the English words, but she understood everything that mattered. She wept quietly on her cot that night, not from fear, but from the overwhelming realization that she'd been lied to her entire life. The monsters were men, the enemy was human, and hatred, she now understood, was a choice that could be unmade. Outside, spring rain returned, washing away the smoke and ash of yesterday's battle. Tomorrow the nurses would be transferred to the processing center, beginning their journey home. But something irreversible had occurred in this basement ward, a small miracle of human connection that proved even in war's darkest chapters, compassion could survive if people chose to see each other truly. The propaganda had taught them to fear. Experience had taught them to recognize their common humanity, and that recognition, Carter knew, was worth more than any military victory. April 15th, 1945. Royal 8 hours. Transport trucks arrived at St. Hedwig's Hospital to evacuate the 32 German nurses to the POW processing center at Regensburg. The morning was crisp and clear, the kind of spring day that felt obscene against the backdrop of war's destruction. Birds sang in the trees surrounding the hospital, indifferent to the human drama unfolding below. Carter's squad assembled in the courtyard to oversee the transfer. The nurses emerged from the basement ward, carrying their few possessions, wearing the same grey Wehrmacht auxiliary uniforms they'd worn for days. But everything else had changed. The terror that had paralyzed them 3 days ago had transformed into something far more complex: acknowledgement, respect, and for many, genuine gratitude. Oberschwester Klein approached Carter directly, Corporal Schwartz translating beside her. Sergeant Carter, I must say something before we go. I was taught to fear you. I was told you were less than human. I believed these lies because I knew nothing else. You have shown me that propaganda is a weapon as deadly as any bomb because it destroys our ability to see truth. You treated us with dignity when you had no obligation to do so. You protected us when you could have abandoned us. You went hungry so we could eat. This is not the behavior of monsters. This is the behavior of honorable men. Carter listened carefully, watching Schwartz's translation, feeling the weight of Klein's words. Ma'am, we were just following regulations. Geneva Convention requires proper treatment of medical personnel. Klein shook her head firmly. No, Sergeant. Regulations can be followed with coldness, with minimum compliance. You followed them with humanity. There is a difference, and that difference saved more than our lives. It saved our ability to trust that goodness can exist even in terrible circumstances. The nurses boarded the trucks one by one, most stopping to nod respectfully to the soldiers who'd guarded them. Some managed broken English. Thank you. God bless. Danke. The inadequacy of language to capture the transformation that had occurred was painfully obvious. Anna Bergman was among the last to board. She approached Private Washington directly, the young soldier who'd stood guard most often, whose hands had trembled from hunger while distributing their rations. She pressed something small into his palm, a silver cross pendant that had belonged to her grandmother, the only item of value she still possessed. "For see," she whispered, "for remembering." Washington tried to refuse, accepting valuables from prisoners violated protocol, but Anna closed his fingers around the cross with both hands, tears streaming down her face. "Please," she said in halting English, one of the few words she'd learned. "Please." Washington looked to Carter, who nodded once. Some protocols mattered less than the human moment they were witnessing. Washington accepted the cross, pressing it to his heart, his own eyes wet with emotion he hadn't expected to feel for an enemy prisoner. The trucks departed at 09:30, disappearing down the damaged road toward Regensburg. Carter's squad stood in the courtyard watching them go, each man processing the profound strangeness of what had occurred. They'd fought across Europe expecting to confront military enemies. They hadn't expected to confront the architecture of hatred itself, or to witness its collapse when challenged by simple decency. The war ended 3 weeks later, May 8th, 1945. Victory in Europe. The 761st Tank Battalion was among the most decorated units in the European theatre, having fought with extraordinary valor despite facing discrimination from their own army. They'd proven themselves in combat repeatedly, destroying enemy positions, liberating concentration camps, pushing deep into the Reich when others said black soldiers couldn't fight effectively. But for Sergeant James Carter, the victory that mattered most happened in a basement ward in Bavaria, when a young German nurse chose to see him as human, despite years of propaganda teaching her otherwise. That victory, the triumph of empathy over indoctrination, was the foundation upon which lasting peace might be built. Carter returned to Birmingham in October 1945, carrying memories of battles fought and friendships forged. He found America unchanged, still segregated, still suspicious, still unable to fully recognize the men who'd worn its uniform. He worked in a factory making automobile parts, joined the NAACP, marched for civil rights, and told his story to anyone who would listen. Private Lewis Washington kept Anna's cross his entire life. He became a teacher in Detroit, showing the pendant to his students when teaching about World War II, explaining that hatred is taught and can therefore be untaught. He never saw Anna Bergman again, but her gesture of human connection across an abyss of propaganda-fueled fear remained the most powerful moment of his life. Oberschwester Margareta Klein returned to München, resuming her nursing career in a Germany devastated by defeat. She spoke publicly about her experience as a POW, challenging the narratives that attempted to sanitize Germany's responsibility for the war's horrors. She testified in post-war tribunals about the destructive power of propaganda, about how ordinary people could be taught to hate through systematic dehumanization, and about how that hate could be broken through simple acts of human decency. Anna Bergmann married a baker from Stuttgart, raised 4 children, and lived until 2003. In her final years, she gave interviews to historians researching the immediate aftermath of Germany's surrender. She spoke emotionally about the Black American soldiers who'd treated her with dignity when she expected brutality, who'd shared their rations when they were hungry themselves, who'd proven through their actions that propaganda was a lie. "I was taught to fear them," she said in a 2001 interview, her voice still breaking with emotion 56 years later. "I believed they were monsters. And then one of them shared his last ration with me, and I understood that I'd been lied to my entire life. That moment changed everything. It taught me that hatred is a choice, and so is love. And choosing love, even when it's difficult, especially when it's difficult, is the only way forward." The historians who documented these stories found hundreds of similar accounts, German civilians and soldiers confronting the reality that Allied forces, particularly Black American soldiers, contradicted every stereotype propaganda had constructed. These encounters didn't erase Germany's guilt or minimize the Holocaust's horror, but they illustrated something crucial, that even in war's darkest hours, individual humans could choose decency over dehumanization, empathy over hatred. The 761st Tank Battalion was finally awarded the Presidential Unit Citation in 1978, 33 years after their service. The recognition came too late for many who'd served, but it acknowledged officially what those men had always known. They'd fought with extraordinary courage despite facing prejudice both from enemies and from their own country. The lesson of St. Hedwig's Hospital endures. Propaganda teaches fear, but experience teaches truth. Hatred is constructed through systematic dehumanization, but it can be dismantled through simple acts of human recognition. One shared ration, given freely when hunger pressed hard, proved more powerful than years of indoctrination. In a world still struggling with divisions of race, religion, and nationality, the story remains urgently relevant. It reminds us that seeing the humanity in those we're taught to fear requires courage. The courage to question what we're told, to trust our direct experience over imposed narratives, to choose empathy even when hatred seems easier. Sergeant James Carter chose that path in a bombed-out hospital in Bavaria. Oberschwester Klein and Anna Bergmann chose it in response. And their choice, replicated in countless small moments throughout history, offers a blueprint for peace that no military strategy can provide. The war ended with treaties and surrenders, but true peace began in basements and foxholes and field hospitals, wherever humans chose to recognize each other across the artificial boundaries hatred had constructed. That recognition, fragile and hard-won, remains humanity's greatest weapon against the propaganda that tries to make us believe our enemies are anything less than human. If this story moved you, hit that subscribe button and share it with someone who needs to hear it. History isn't just about battles, it's about the moments when ordinary people chose extraordinary compassion. Drop a comment telling us, have you ever experienced a moment that challenged everything you believed? Let's keep these conversations alive. New stories every week. Don't miss them.